So welcome to Aro Ling Cardiff, and Ngakpa ö-Dzin is going to be teaching this evening. It's going to be another Dza Patrul story this evening, and it's apparently the village Ngakpa. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Dza Patrul Rinpoche was once wandering in the mountainous area of Derge near Kato Gompa when he came across Gyarong Lama, an old monk who was very pious and devoted. Gyarong Lama noticed that although quite ragged, Patrul's tuba was maroon in colour and suspected that he might have some vague religious connections. They struck up a conversation as they walked together, and Gyarong Lama asked, "You seem like a man who might be interested in religion." "Am I right?" Patrul smiled and said, "Yes, I'm a Nyingma." Gyarong Lama was very pleased with this response. He questioned further, "What have you learnt about religion?" Patrul hung his head a little and replied, "Oh, this and that. The essence of this matter is immeasurably vast and subtle, and I'm just a village Ngakpa, you know." Gyarong Lama smiled in a paternal sort of way and said, "Well, my friend, there's no reason to stop you learning a little more. If you'd like to come and stay with me for a while, I'll give you some coaching in these things. I'm not a great scholar, but I know a thing or two about the teachings." There's an excellent text by Dza Patrul Rinpoche called The Direct Speech of Kuntu Zangpo, and if you like, I'll go through it with you. Maybe you've heard of this great master. Patrul's eyes opened wide, and he replied, "Yes, I've heard that name, but I thought he was just a Ngakpa like me." Gyarong Lama shook his head. "Oh dear, no, my dear friend, you are very wrong there. Let me put you right about that. Dza Patrul is nothing at all like you. Oh no, he's a very great master who presides over one of the largest Nyingma monasteries. Wherever did you get the idea that he was just a Ngakpa?" Patrul looked a little sheepish. "Well," he replied, "I suppose I must have heard that somewhere or other. I guess there's no accounting for what people say. But I'd be grateful to come and study the text with you if your offer still stands." It did. So Patrul went to stay with the kindly old Lama. And immediately they arrived at his home, the instruction began. And very good it was too. Gyarong Lama really seemed to have a very good understanding. And Patrul listened with great interest to the precise explanations of his own book. After they'd spent a few days together in this way, it came to Gyarong Lama's attention that the very amazing and wonderful Dza Patrul Rinpoche himself was due to arrive at Kato Gompa to give teachings on the very text the two lamas had been studying. "This is the most incredible opportunity, my friend. Now we have an opportunity to hear these teachings from the enlightened master himself." Patrul looked astonished. "Would they let a village Ngakpa into such a teaching?" he asked with a sigh. "Sure," said Gyarong Lama. "Don't worry about that. If you come with me, there'll be no problem. I'll vouch for you. I'll make sure that you get a good place to sit. Not with me, you understand, but a place where you'll be able to see and hear well enough." Then Patrul looked a little apologetic and said, "You're very kind to help an old Ngakpa in this way, but there's just one problem." Gyarong asked what that was, in case he could be of help. "Well," said Patrul, "I've got a few things to attend to before I go to Kato. But you can be sure I'll be there on the day. I will arrive early and look out for you. It would not do for me to miss this occasion." Gyalrong Lama smiled. Good, let us meet there then. But, he added, maybe try to tidy yourself up a bit. It would be good to look presentable at the Gompa. Patrul agreed. There's not much I can do about my hair, but I'll make sure that I look as smart as I can so I don't embarrass you. Patrul took his leave from his gracious host and made his way to Katog. The day of the teaching arrived, and Gyalrong Lama looked around for his new acquaintance, the village Ngakpa. The time was getting on. Not seeing him anywhere, he finally decided to go inside and await him there. His friend had obviously been detained. He most likely would show up later. Dza Patrul Rinpoche was already there at Katog Gompa, so it was good to await him in the Lakhang. Sat in the audience of monks, Gyalrong Lama stood up and offered prostration as Dza Patrul Rinpoche was escorted to the high throne. But when he came to resume his seat, Gyalrong Lama was stunned. He'd never seen Dza Patrul before, and the sight that presented itself completely disorientated the old monk. This was the simple village Ngakpa, to whom he had explained the teachings of the great Dza Patrul Rinpoche. He was horrified and bewildered, but Patrul put him at his ease. Ah, there you are, my friend Gyalrong Lama. I've been waiting for you as I promised. Lucky for me that you helped me with this text. Patrul turned to one of his attendants and said, prepare a special seat for my friend Gyalrong Lama. He really has such a good understanding of this text. You people should really study with him. Now we go back to the narrative with Ngakpa Rinpoche and Kabye Kunsang Dorje Rinpoche. And so, Rinpoche asked, why does Patrul make a pretense of this kind? I thought about it for a moment and replied, in order to teach people through skillful means? Rinpoche didn't seem too interested in this reply and repeated, and so, why this pretense? What did it prove? Wouldn't it be better for him to be straightforward in his dealing with people? This seemed a good question. Yes, I said, that's what I would do, but if a person doesn't have realization, then it's difficult to do anything else other than be straightforward. Rinpoche laughed heartily at this. You would think so, but many people think they can act in strange ways in order to show they have some special powers. People make a show of being humble in order to impress. People also make a show of being ignorant in order to impress. People who think they are Buddhist are sometimes not very straightforward at all. Anyhow, assuming Patrul has realization, what is learned from his not being straightforward? Be quick. Rinpoche was obviously a little tired of the slowness with which I answered, so I dived headlong into an answer. Gyalrong Lama learned not to judge by appearances. Rinpoche nodded in approval. Maybe, and concluded, you know, many people have disrespect for the white Sangha. Those who are not so very famous that they can't be insulted, they call village Ngakpas. You will find that there is often criticism for people who maintain the Gokha Changlo, the white skirt and long hair of the Ngakpang tradition. But this tradition has great honor in the past. In the time of Rinpoche, the Gokha Changloi sat on the king's hair. They sat on his left side while the monks sat on the right. It was the Gokha Changloi who kept the lineages of the Nyingma alive through the time of Langdama's persecution. Rinpoche poured eagle beer into 2 glasses, watching the levels rise in each with silent, spacious attention to what seemed to be each milliliter. When Langdama went in search of the Gokha Changloi to destroy them, Sangye Yeshe manifested a black scorpion the size of a yak above the king's head. Rinpoche chuckled quietly and wiped the beer froth from his moustache. Langdama promised then to leave the white Sangha in peace. This was a wonderful story, and I asked Rinpoche if it was widely known, to which he answered that it was, but knowing and remembering the meaning are not necessarily the same. Rinpoche thought for a while and said, sometimes the story of Patrul is told differently. Rinpoche must have noticed a look of curiosity on my face, but gave a dismissive wave of his hand to indicate he was disinterested in furnishing details. I decided to leave well alone. It was a glorious afternoon, and we walked up to the caves where Padmasambhava had meditated. When we had returned to Tsopema, he told me another account of Dza Patrul Rinpoche, and was similar in some ways to the first. Patrul, being footloose and fancy-free, as was his wont, was always coming across situations in which he could let the passage of events do what it would. Whilst roaming the highlands of Kham, Patrul came upon a company of religious types travelling to the south. He asked whether, as a practitioner, he might join them. The monks said they would have to ask one of the lamas in the caravan, and that if he was agreeable, there would be no difficulty as long as he could pitch in with the work that had to be done. Patrul seemed pleased with this arrangement, and after the agreement of one of the lamas was sought and gained, he was put to work gathering firewood. Patrul was evidently very willing to do whatever he was asked, and the monks soon realized they were onto a good thing. Soon he was doing a share of everyone's work. Behind his back, the monks shared a jest about it. Hey, this village Ngakpa knows the best kind of practice, doesn't he? And so it went on. One day, Patrul asked one of the monks, what do you do when you don't have the work of the camp to do? The monk looked at him curiously and wondered if their run of luck with the hard-working village Ngakpa had come to an end. Oh, we have no free time. All our time is spent practicing. Patrul looked surprised. Is that a fact? Really? That's just perfect, he intoned. Yatsen, what a thing it must be to be a monk such as you and your colleagues. The monk smiled self-consciously. Yes, he said, it is the way of virtue as laid down by the Buddha. This was getting a trifle uncomfortable for the monk, and so he decided better ask a question, if only to change the subject. But what do you do for religious practice? Patrul looked sheepish and replied, me? Oh, well, I just do my best to leave my mind as it is. The monk giggled at this and said, poor fellow, you don't know too much about religion, do you? Patrul shook his head. Seems that way, but I'm happy to help you fellows create merit and share in that a little. The monk smiled nervously and excused himself, not knowing what to make of the conversation which he had just engaged. Was this village Ngakpa a kindly, well-mannered simpleton, or what? Still, as long as he continued to do the bulk of the work, it seemed better not to ask too many questions. After a week, they arrived in the vicinity of a Kagyu Gompa, where an empowerment was going to be given by Tashi Ursa Rinpoche, one of the major disciples of Kongtrul Lodro Taye. The travelling assembly of ecclesiastics got wind of this and decided it would be good to attend. Camp was pitched and the lama's horses were decked out in the prescribed manner, exquisitely caparisoned with ornately carved and gilded saddles. The lamas and their attendants wore their finest robes and hats for the occasion and arrived with parasols and banners fluttering. The entourage displayed the profusion of polychromatic religious pageantry, of which only the Tibetan sense of grandiose is capable. It caused great wonder among the villagers who came to admire the spectacle of their arrival. Paltrul was something of an embarrassment to the calculated dignity of the monastic cavalcade, and waited until a discreet interval had elapsed before he followed them into the courtyard of the Gompa. The place was very crowded for the empowerment, and at its conclusion it took several hours for Tashi Öse Rinpoche to bless the assembly. First came the highest of the visiting dignitaries with whom he touched foreheads, then the lesser, whose heads he touched with both hands. Then came others according to rank, and gradually the touch of one hand was followed by the touch of a yak hair whisk.
We've had a few of those.
Yes. The very last of all to receive the blessing was Paltrul, but Öse Rinpoche had seen him coming and was too quick. Before Paltrul had approached the throne, Öse Rinpoche had handed him the yak hair whisk and was performing full prostrations. Öse Rinpoche offered his throne to Paltrul and took the lower one for himself. When they had seated themselves, and to the amazement of all, Öse Rinpoche introduced the great Dza Patrul Rinpoche, friend of his own teacher, Kontrul Lodro Taye. I have the idea, I said to Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, that it was part of Paltrul's personality display to fall in with situations simply in order that people could experience their own patterning. This seems to be a method that's far more powerful than confronting people with their own bigoted attitudes. Rinpoche nodded. That's it, he said, and rubbed the back of his neck whilst looking around the room. It was almost as if he was looking for something, and then he fixed me with his stare. This is precisely why Paltrul did the monks' work for them, and why he asked them what they do with their time off. He gives them the opportunity to examine their actions of body, voice, and mind, but they're not able to understand. This makes the lesson he teaches even stronger. A response was wanted, I could tell, but this time I had one. So it wasn't simply a matter of floating with the situations in which he found himself. He actually participated in the situation that was being created. Rinpoche nodded, but this time gave a slight smile, the one that betokened the right answer. Rinpoche commented that one had to be creative with one's intelligence, but not too creative. He pointed out that Paltrul had said and done just enough for the results of his actions to have the desired effect. I then asked whether Paltrul knew that Öse Rinpoche was the Lama giving the Wong. This seemed to amuse Rinpoche. I didn't ask why. My question was amusing, which is probably just as well, because he had something further to add. You cannot always know what will happen. Mostly, you have to go into emptiness and see what happens. Rinpoche chuckled again. You will have to do this so many times.
It's a very nice story.
Yes.
Ones I'm not quite so familiar with some of the others. I think it's important to remember that you have to be somebody before you can pretend not to be somebody.
Yes.
I don't think we're in a position of being somebody yet, so we can't pretend to be anything other than what we are.
You can't even pretend to be humble because
No.
all the great lamas are humble. So we just have to be ourselves.
I hope that's enough.
I very much like the way that Paltrul's treatment of the people who failed to recognize him was very much in keeping with their own manners. So with Gyalrong Lama, he was very kind and friendly and wasn't really aiming to be tricky in any way, or didn't aim to do anything particularly special with that situation. Whereas with the monks, he pushed a little and changed things.
But there's such a lack of ego
Yeah.
in his responses that he doesn't care what their view of him is.
No.
It's compassionate activity.
Yes.
He just sees how best he can help them.